Well, hello, writers. Welcome to episode number 74 of How Do You Write? I'm thrilled you're here today. Today, I am talking to Alex Dolan, who is a writer local to my area. He's a thriller writer. It was super fun to talk to him. He's got a lot of knowledge about that industry. And since I am trying to break into it, it was super fun to talk to him. I know you are going to enjoy it. And a little update on what's going on around here. You guys, what is not going on around here? Since the time I spoke to you last week, I believe I did not bring this up last week. Could be wrong. My brain. But I believe this is true, that since we talked, I have not only come up with the idea of recording my Fast Draft Your Memoir book for audiobook, but I have completed it. Yes, I lost my damn mind this week. Yeah, it just occurred to me that I wanted Fast Draft Your Memoir in audio form. So I looked into how I could do that. I have done audiobooks in many different ways. I think I have 11 or more. I can't remember audiobooks out. Some have been by the publisher. I have hired out some, which has gone really well. I love doing that. It's nice to be indie on some things because you get to make that choice. When publishers do your audiobooks, you don't get very much say in the narrator. But if you're hiring it out, you get ultimate say in the narrator, which is great. And I thought about doing that, but boy, is it expensive, number one. Number two, this is a nonfiction book. For me, for nonfiction, when I listen to it, I want to hear it in the voice of the writer. So I decided that I would try to do it myself. So I Googled. That's what you do, right? I Googled. And I found out that it is a very bad idea. It's like the worst idea, according to everyone, to do your own audiobook if you don't know what the heck you're doing, which I didn't. And I accepted that for a minute. I even looked into renting studio space, a recording studio area, and paying for their production and going in and narrating it myself. But it was just as expensive as it would be to hire somebody and have their production person do it. So I let go of that. I don't really have that money lying around. So I decided to give it a try. I Googled one more time and I found this one guy who had done it successfully using GarageBand and distributing to ACX, which is the Amazon platform for uploading audiobooks that then go to Audible and iTunes and all the platforms. So I just decided to give it a try. I baffled our bedroom in 6 different mattress toppers that I got from Target after a long time trying to find foam that I could stick on the walls. That was impossible to find. And then I realized mattress toppers would work. I used my standing desk on the bed, propped on along a mirror so it didn't wobble. I used my good podcasting mic, and I learned so much. There is nothing I did not screw up doing this audiobook, but I loved it. I absolutely loved everything about the process, except for all the screw ups. I spent 35 hours. It took 35 hours from start to finish. I'm really glad that I tracked that time. I know how much time it took to record it. I know how much time I took to edit it, although I can't bring those numbers up right now. And all in all, I think it was totally worth it. I hope. Basically, if I sell a few copies of the audiobook, that's kind of free found money, right? I already have the book. I'm putting it out. The reason I got so frantic about it, though, was that I'd really like the audiobook to come out on the day that the book does, the ebook and the paper version, which is February 4th, which is like next week. So this time last week, I just decided to pour my all into it. Basically, I put everything onto the back burner and did this. And you guys, it sounds pretty good. It does not sound like my podcast. My podcast is never scripted. I'm always stuttering and umming and making tons of mistakes and not having full sentences or even complete thoughts, which drives me crazy when I'm editing the podcasts. But the book was already written. The other thing that was so cool about doing this was it was another chance for revision. As I read the sentences out loud and I heard how some of them sounded, there are these terrible outtakes all through the recording where basically I read a sentence and then I go, what did I mean? And I'd already gone through this book a million times and I was still catching things that needed to be fixed because they didn't make as much sense as I wanted them to make. So it was just such a joy. And I just uploaded all the files to ACX and I'm really hoping that they don't reject them all. They still could. They could reject them all and I could lose those 35 hours. But you know what? That's the risk of an entrepreneurial lifestyle. I am more than exhausted by the sound of my own voice. I am so tired of listening to myself talk. I can't stand anything that I say. Even now, it's driving me crazy to talk to you. So I'm hoping that that will wear off. And I'm sure that it will. I have just spent so much time editing. And actually, this is a really good time on the audio version of this, not the video. Unfortunately, I am going to put in a clip from when I exported the track that was meant to go to ACX, but I accidentally mixed all the tracks together. And when I first played it, number one, I thought, Jesus Christ, this is how it's all going to sound. And I have wasted those 35 hours and so much energy on this project because I really sounded like a possessed demon from hell. And it was pretty funny. So I will include that on the audio version right here. You guys, I'm so tired of editing things and my dog is out there making barfing noises. She's not barfing. She's just making terrible noises. So I don't think I'm even going to edit that out because I can't edit anything else this week. But I just wanted to tell you that I'm very excited about that. So I also wanted to take this moment to thank some Patreon supporters. And I have been very remiss in doing this. And so it's like maybe more than a month since I've done this. So there's quite a few names and thank you so much. And I also want to say that if I forgot to say it on my podcast before, Patreon rolled back that terrible idea that they had that charged patrons, you guys, more and didn't take the money from me in terms of service costs. They heard so much grief about that terrible decision that they rolled that back. So if you have been thinking about pledging and haven't because you heard the outcry from them doing it wrong, they fixed it, which I have to say I really commend them as a company. It was less than a week they took to revamp everything they were doing because they listened to what we said, which very much impressed me. So new patrons, thank you to Natalie Lurs, Heather Golder, hey Heather, Laura Loner, Kara Gott Warner, Bonnie Craig, Rosanna Gasparian, I hope I didn't butcher that. Thank you. The Career Author, which is Jay Thorne and Zach Bohannon's new podcast, The Career Author. You should go listen to that. It's great. Barbara Breton, Kristen Collins, Christine Halverson, R.I. Merrill. Hi, R.I. Sophie Birdie. Thanks again. Julia Borghini. Thanks, you guys, so much. It means the world. And next week, my new essay is going out on home. That's the part of Replenish, the memoir I'm writing right now, in which I'm looking at this month of looking at home, building home, taking care of home in order to replenish our spirits. So that's happening. I just feel like so much is happening. I'm teaching at Stanford 2 days. That class is all ready to go. And I haven't taught in a while though, so I'm excited. And it's an incredibly busy 2 weeks. And I feel great. I feel jazzed and motivated and excited and inspired and kind of completely exhausted. So today, recording the podcast is the last thing I have to do before I go out to dinner with my sisters. And I will believe I'm going to have to edit this, aren't I? Oh no. I believe I will toast myself with a glass of wine and some Thai food, hopefully. So I'm going to enjoy that. But now, without further ado, let's get into the interview with Alex Dolan. You're going to love it. Enjoy. Please drop me a line with what you're doing, what you're working on. I love to hear from you guys. And happy writing to you. Talk soon. Okay, well, I could not be more pleased today to welcome Alex Dolan to the show. Alex, hello.
Hi, welcome. Welcome to me.
we will
Thanks for
all
having
we
me.
will all welcome
Yeah,
you. I love that. I love that opening.
this
Let
is
me
this is how easily disoriented I am with Skype.
Well, the new Skype. Oh my gosh, the new Skype has issues. I think it's a little bit more stable, like I was telling you on email, but otherwise, ugh. Well, let me give you a little introduction for those who might not know you. Alex Dolan is the author of The Euthanist and the Empress of Tempera. Tempera, right?
Tempera, no, you got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's also the host of Thrill Seekers, part of Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, which reaches 3 million listeners worldwide. He's a member of International Thriller Writers and Sisters in Crime and has been an executive committee member of the San Francisco Bay Area's Litquake Festival. In addition, he has recorded 4 music albums. He holds an MS from Columbia and currently lives in California. Again, thanks so much for coming on the show. I am in touch with you because we frequent the same cafe. And I won't
We
out the
do.
cafe if you want to remain mysterious. But it's a pretty great writing cafe, isn't it?
It's one of the best writing cafes if you live in the San Francisco Bay Area and you live in the East Bay and you don't want to go to a Starbucks.
Yep.
It's a great writing cafe. And yeah, I don't know whether or not I want to out the cafe either. Like
Let's
I want to give
not.
them business. So
But
let's not. But if you
it's
want to,
we'll say
if
it's
you
in San
really,
Leandro and it's
it's
not Starbucks.
It's in San Leandro, California, not Starbucks. And if you really want to know, you can PM me and I will tell you privately.
Oh, I think that's a great idea. That's good. Yeah, some of my friends and I have always called that the Magic Cafe because it just seems to be a place where even when you go with writing friends, you can still manage to put your head down and get actual real work done.
Right, right.
Yeah, it's odd, but there's that whole family living room vibe, and I don't know if people do it still, but when I back in the day when I used to go there, I used to leave my computer on the table. What was I
Yeah.
thinking? Do people still do that?
Well, I was gonna joke across town up by the highway, there's a Starbucks that I call the Magic Cafe because lots of things disappear from it.
Oh
And
no.
so yeah, it's not the place you want to go to the bathroom and leave your laptop out. Yeah.
I once installed an alarm system. Have you seen those alarm systems for your computer where if it moves or a key is pressed, it starts wailing like a car alarm? And it just amused me. And I set it up at that cafe once, and then I went to the bathroom and I hurried back so fast because I was worried somebody would bump it and then everyone would panic. But
All right, so you're reminding me of my all-time favorite alarm clock, and it was made sometime in the 80s, but it was made as in the 80s, recalling back the Batman and Robin characters from the 60s, and
uh-huh.
it had like Adam West and whoever played Robin was on this thing. And the thing is, it was meant for like a 6-year-old, but my 19-year-old college roommate had it. And it was when the alarm went off, it literally was Adam West and the other guy talking to each other saying, "Holy cow, Batman, I think this guy needs to wake up." And Batman comes in and is like, "Well, I think we should wake him up, Boy Wonder." And they just start shouting, wake up,"
Oh
until you turn the
no.
thing off. But it's like Adam West as Batman shouting at you until you turn him off.
I hope you got
Uh,
well paid for that gig, for that particular
I really
alarm
did.
clock gig.
Yeah.
That's
But
hilarious.
if I could program that noise to whoever steals my laptop,
It
it
would
would
be
be
worth
its
it.
own. Yeah, it would be totally worth it. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, let me dive right in with your writing process. How do you write? Are you always at our unnamed cafe?
I tend to write. I tend to plan. I'm a big planner, and so usually what starts with me is a key concept, and so it's sort of more of an idea of the world that I want to build. And so for the first book, which was that I had out called The Euthanist, I thought it would be interesting to do something around the concept of euthanasia
Hmm.
and to have my main character be somebody who was a euthanasia practitioner. And so that was sort of um, the cornerstone of this world that I wanted to create. And then once I have an idea of that world, or at least the kind of the premise of the book, then I think who would be interesting to be in these parts, who would be in
Mm.
this world. And so all my associations with euthanasia for better or worse, we're with Jack Kevorkian.
Kevorkian, sure, of
Kevorkian,
course.
who did great work and was a very important person, but who looked like death warmed over. And I don't think that necessarily helped him
I don't think it did either.
always. And so the central character of my book, The Euthanist, was the exact opposite of what you would expect if you think of Jack Kevorkian. So it was a woman. She was young. She was physically formidable. And she was, a little rough around the edges, a little crass, but still had the same empathy and compassion for people, but she was so much more vibrant than, and she was a former EMT worker, because I had interviewed a lot of EMT workers and paramedics, and saw, how many people regularly deal with death on a daily basis when you're doing those jobs. And so something like euthanasia or death with dignity would be kind of a natural offshoot of a career like that.
Yeah.
And so I start with the premise, and then I think, all right, who would be interesting and possibly unexpected in a world like that?
So really the characters come to you before the plot does.
The characters come to me because I'm dropping somebody in a world. Like, if you think of, like, a good example to think of is, if your premise is, I want to create a theme park but fill it with dinosaurs. It's like,
right.
Pretty unique. And then you think, well, who do I drop into that world that would be interesting? Well, you could drop in a mathematician who, subscribes to chaos theory. You could, and so, like, you get these characters that would have natural conflict of being in this world. So the other main character in the book is somebody who represents law enforcement, and I'm very, very I'm typically very hesitant to write about law enforcement because they're such a ubiquitous character to have in a thriller. But for this, I thought, well, if you're in a world where somebody's breaking the law and effectively killing people, whether or not you agree with whether it's a mercy killing, having somebody who represents law enforcement would by definition put them in some sort of conflict to be in that world. And so I thought, that's a good example of, and having them have to, so in the end, it's this sort of strange relationship where they're at allies and enemies all at once, because they're each trying to force each other to do something they don't want to do in this book.
That was one of the, I have to say, that was one of the things I got too late in my career. It took me a long time to realize that your book goes better if you set up the conflict to be organic in the characters. Like, you can actually manipulate that and make that happen, which is a great tip if somebody is listening and hasn't actually thought all the way through to that. Yeah, help yourself out. Give yourself that gift. And then, so where do you write? Do you write at home? Do you write on the computer? Do you write every day?
I write on the computer. I'm not a writing by hand person anymore, and it's mainly because I've done it for so long that it's so much faster if I get my thoughts out on computer. I mean, there was this feeling, there is still this school of thought that you're in touch with your feelings more if it's more tactile and you do that and do it by hand. At one point I even believed it, but at this point, like, I feel like whatever is the instrument that allows you to bring your thoughts to the page the fastest is a good thing. Yes. For me, that happens to be my laptop.
Yeah.
I will write almost anywhere but my home. And it stinks because my house has so many great writing locations. Like this, I'm speaking to you from my home. I love my home, but I need some degree of distraction for me to be able to write. I don't know if it's so this cafe that we talked about where we both used to write. I like the idea of looking up, seeing a momentary distraction of somebody doing something, and then going back to my writing. It could be at a library, it could be at a cafe, it could be on sunny days if I can just be outside, and just like being connected to the world even though I'm buried in my laptop, still feeling some sort of connection to the rest of the world really helps me. Where I would be really bad if you had sat me at a desk that faced the corner and where I was staring at a wall. I would be very uncreative then.
Interesting. I've never thought about why I like that so much, but perhaps that's some of it. I have to leave the house for first drafts. I can revise at home, but I cannot get a first draft out to save my life.
That's kind of accurate for me too. Yeah.
Isn't that weird?
As we get into multiple drafts and it's how much brain juice do I need to actually, if I need all of it in a first draft or even in a rewrite, then I need to be out of the home. If it's minor stuff that like my editor, my agent has minor edits that don't require a whole lot of creative juice to think about, I can kind of do that at home.
Yeah. Interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
What is your biggest challenge when it comes to writing?
The biggest challenge I think is character development, and I think it's character development in terms of how much I get to know my people really well before they go on the page. I end up writing bios for each character that can be upwards of 10,000 words each.
You're kidding.
Yeah, I know everything about my people before they go on before they go on the page.
I know almost nothing. I know what they want, and I know how I'm going to break them, and that's it. That's all I got.
I know what their most embarrassing secret is. I know who they're attracted to. I know.
Do you have
a
list of things you ask yourself about them, or is it something that just happens every time?
I have a standard questionnaire that I ask, and that's Frankenstein from a lot of similar exercises pulled from a few different books, plus some of my own questions. And so I'll get to know everything so that if I put them in a scenario, then I'll know naturally how that person will react. So a great exercise for me was when the first book got published, we produced it. It got sold to Audible, and Audible did an audiobook. And so if you're ever lucky enough to do an audiobook, which I found the experience really rewarding. I worked with an actor who was the narrator, and she did a very deep read of the book, and then came back to me with questions. And the questions were as rudimentary as asking how somebody would pronounce something. But a lot of it was about motivation and understanding character. And she'd ask me like, well, would this person do this? And I'd think about it and be like, and without really having to think about it, I could rationalize how they would say something based on some quirk of their behavior that I knew.
That is hilarious. I think I have 8 audiobooks out, and I've had those questions from the narrators, and I always respond with, I have no idea. Yeah. I don't know. They become, real living human people as I go, but I wouldn't be able to answer those questions. And then it makes me wonder, like, should I try that kind of technique?
I thought it was fun to know, but again, like I'm still fairly new. I only have 2 books published. I have, I've just finished book 5, which my agent is reviewing right now.
That's not fairly new. That's you're well established already.
But so I don't, I feel like I'm still learning the process. So there are parts of it that I like. Maybe I don't need to do all that backstory, but I felt like,
I'm envious of it.
Well, I feel like that had been a weakness, and it still is, because I'm writing literary thrillers. And there's always a question to me of how much of that person do I put on the page. And sometimes when I put more of the person, more of the emotions on the page, an editor will come back and say, you're slowing the pacing down by putting in all this stuff. And so that character development gets yanked and for the sake of keeping the pacing going. And but it's, for those who read me, it's not for lack of want. I would love to go off on a 40-page tangent on, what somebody picks out to wear on the anniversary of their children's death or something, whatever it is.
I would actually love to know that. Yes.
Right.
I would.
Yeah.
That's great.
What would be a great story? Have somebody pick out a wardrobe on the anniversary of their children's death and have it be like them in drag, because they're kind of finally free to be the
Oh,
person that they want to be.
I
Um,
love that.
so, free story idea
That's
for anyone who wants it.
I think it's wonderful. We'll see if
Um,
anybody writes that. Please let us know.
yeah, please let us know. And
What
we'll,
what is your biggest joy in writing?
I love, I guess, world building. I love
Mm,
really creating a world that's new. I like if I can write something that I feel like somebody else wouldn't have written,
mm,
and something that is me and unique, then I feel like I've done a good job. I don't really want to write. There are a lot of writers out there that do a great job at what they do. I don't want to be somebody else, and
mm-hmm.
so that's I don't want to have a hard-boiled detective who suffers no fools. And
Yeah,
not that those are bad things. Like, a lot of people do them really well. It's just there are a lot out there,
yeah,
and my goal is to write. The people that I grew up with were people like Roald Dahl, who
yeah.
had just wonderful imaginations, and
Were
you know
completely themselves. He was completely himself.
he was, and he
Yeah.
was an absolute jerk.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. His family's
In
not
real
happy
life.
about that,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah. I was unhappy to find. Yeah,
I was
but
unhappy to find that out too.
yeah, but as a writer, he had so much imagination, and I grew up thinking, well, why can't adult novels have those
Mm,
kind of imaginations? And there are books out there, like there's an author named Stephen Dobbins who I like a lot, who is um, has a book out called The Wrestler's Cruel Study, but he's an incredibly prolific poet and writer, and Stephen King is one of Stephen King's favorite writers,
oh my
but
goodness.
he's a killer writer. He's sort of like the Joyce Carol Oates of like thrillers.
Wow, I don't even know his name. I'm gonna have to check him out.
He's a great writer, and he has a lot of imagination. He has a wonderful narrative voice too, which is another thing that attracts me to writers. And something like when you were asking, what goal do I have as a writer? The other is to have a unique narrative voice that people seem to click into.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Which is something my students are always asking me about. So I'm gonna go veer off of the questions that I sent you. Um, how do you think that a writer goes about finding their voice?
Um, I think much like life, if your ability to not, can I swear on your
Yes, you
podcast?
can.
The ability to not give a shit about things really
Yeah,
helps you.
yeah.
And I think in life and in finding your voice, if you can write, you write more authentically if you don't care about being perceived any certain way,
Mm,
and you just write the way you think. Um, that's not to say that you can't elevate that,
mm-hmm.
but I think I have a certain way of thinking, and I think the more successful, the more the more authentic I am to that voice in my head, the more easily I can write something that resonates with readers.
Which is
When
to
I try,
say, they'll
yeah.
go on.
No, I was going to say when I end up trying for something, I think when I put so much more effort into something, and it can still be good, but it's not. It doesn't connect as viscerally.
Yeah, and you have actually just fairly effectively
Yeah.
proven my point that I talk to my students about all the time, which is that the more you try to have a voice, the more you'll fail. And your voice is like your accent. It's something that everybody else can hear. You might not be able to hear it, but as long as you're authentic, your voice will come through.
Right.
So, oh, good. Excellent. What is the absolute best or worst writing advice you've ever been given?
Write what you know.
Is that
Um,
best or worst?
that's one of the worst. Because I think that limits your scope of what you can write about, and it limits the scope of things you know about. I think you write what you're passionate about, and if you're one of the things I love about this is being able to do research on things that I don't know about, and I get to be a kid again, and I get to learn about worlds that I didn't know existed, and I can write
Hmm.
about them.
You
And
are probably not a euthanist. You don't have to admit it if you are. Is that actually a term, or did you make that up?
that is a made up term.
I
There's
love it.
no,
It
yeah,
should be euthanist.
yeah, yeah. That should be a job, yeah, somewhere, yeah. Um, And with the new health care bill, it may be a job, actually. But yeah, I so the bad advice I've gotten are things that are very limiting. Um, some of the bad advice is very subjective. Like I remember somebody saying somebody rejecting me at one point saying I don't like present tense prose. And like, well, hard to argue with that. Like,
Sure is.
yeah, yeah. And so I'd say, like, if you have a bullshit meter, turn it on, and if somebody gives you advice that seems to smack, I mean, listen, because a lot of people have great advice to tell you. But if something just seems strange and you can't understand the rationale for why somebody would advise you on like, don't use the letter T. Like, if there's something like that comes out that you're like, well, that seems kind of funny. Why would somebody? So don't be afraid to question that advice. But at the same time, don't reject all advice, because a lot of writers have really good advice. And one simple one, although it oversimplifies the issue, is try not to write with adverbs. That's it's not always a thing, but it will help you create a tighter voice if you try to drop the adverbs. Try not to write in passive voice. That's good advice. And I think that part of it is, I have my own theory that the nature of how we consume media right now, where everything is shorter, everything is in, like, I think we see so many books that we expect to read in the first person now, because everything that we read on social media, everything that we engage with is all about me, me, me.
Oh, what an interesting theory. I had not thought of it that way.
Yeah, I think like part of it is we're so used to seeing people present us with whatever persona they want us to see that we expect that in our prose now. We expect we're reading a person.
Wow.
And I know that pacing is more important than ever because of the nature of the media we consume, and the pace of everything has gotten so much faster. There's no Alfred Hitchcock slow build where, like, if you watch the original Psycho, it takes you half the movie to even get to the Bates Motel.
Right.
Like,
right.
You would never have that now. That would never get greenlit now.
Yeah.
And so pacing, Megan Abbott, actually, and a number of other thriller writers for the New Yorker, were asked what they thought constituted a good thriller, and I remember her specifically saying, "Oh, pacing." And a lot of other writers that are very successful now, they emphasize pacing. And I think about it more in terms of the movies I watch, shows that I watch, and the critical element of pacing and being able to tell stories and not getting bogged down in tangents that don't push the story forward. Now, there'll be somebody out there that says, well, that's not the kind of book that I want to write.
Of course.
And it may not be. But even in literary fiction, I'm finding that when I read literary fiction, the pacing has sped up a little bit from what it used to be.
That's fascinating. I'm going to keep my eye out for that, because my gut says you're absolutely right, and I just haven't been able to verbalize that. So that's great. Thanks for sharing that.
By the way, I feel like the way I'm rendered here on Skype, I feel like I have like a Bruce Campbell-like chin.
You actually do. I noticed the cleft in your chin. It's very Bruce Campbell-ish. Is it not normally that way?
No, it's sort of what I look like, but I think my laptop camera distorts it, so I look extra Bruce Campbell.
Like the shadow is happening more. That's hilarious.
But I'll take it. Yeah.
No, so if you're listeners on the pod on iTunes, you'll have to go over to YouTube and check out the chin. So that's excellent. Check out the chin. You might have already done this because you've just given us a couple of really great tips, but can you share a quick craft tip of any sort?
Craft. I guess I'll go with the character development thing that I mentioned earlier, where if somebody pings me, I'm happy to share the list of questions that I use to flesh out my characters. But before I even hit the page, I know exactly who my folks are and what they'll do and what they look, everything from what they look like to, but really what motivates them. And the thing about that is that it'll make your drafts flow much faster. And I stole this from a book about film and television called Story. And there's a book called Story that's written by a guy, I want to say his name is Robert McGee.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it's a wonderful book that's never carried in the writing section of bookstores. It's always in the film section. But it is a wonderful book to read about story development. And it's all about the essence of story. And he argues basically if you do all the work going into the draft and you're not stumbling around during the draft, drafts will flow because you'll already know your people. And even though it's more frustrating to get to page 1 because you want to get started on that draft, the time that you spend before you start your project, if the more prep time you do, the easier your first draft will be. And your first draft will still suck and you'll have to revise it and embrace that and love it.
Oh, yeah.
But it means your revisions will flow just because you'll know the world that you're building so much more going into it.
I'm listening
and that
to
ideation part of it takes so much longer.
Oh my God. I'm listening to you with wide open ears because I'm entering the 3rd draft of this thriller. And my problem is that I just don't have a tight enough handle on my main character's arc. And if I had known that going in, and I'm now making those decisions in revision, why is she reacting like this? I don't know. And I'm having to figure it out now, which is a problem. So the reason I started this show was because I'm always searching for the magic bullet in terms of writing process. And I know there is none, but I like to hear all of the tips and give them to my listeners so that they can choose between the tips. And I'm going to read that book because I have it on my shelf and I haven't read it. So I'm going to read that and maybe try some of that character stuff. And I want you to send me the character things that you ask. That would be wonderful.
I will. I will happily share that with you. Yeah.
That'd be great. Yeah. Thank you. When you have self-doubt or dark days, how do you deal with that?
Sometimes I just hunker down and do the work. I mean, I think of the work as, I think of it a lot like exercise.
Yeah.
And for people that exercise a lot, the human body has, when you're actually exercising, whatever your form of exercise is, there's a period of work and then there's a period of recovery and rest. And the rest and recovery is as important as the work. And I think in terms of creativity in the same way, there are periods where you hunker down and you do the work, and then there are times where you step away from the work, and that's for me when some thoughts coalesce, or I can actually bridge sections of the story, or a thought that hadn't occurred to me will occur to me during these periods of recovery. And so when I'm in a dark mood, I kind of do it in the same way that you grudgingly go and do a workout on a bad day. You just do it because you know that even if it's garbage that you're putting out there, that work can actually pay dividends the next time you take a break and you're allowed to think about it.
Excellent way of putting that. I love that. On really bad days, if you just can't get out of that funk and you were given the ability to choose any profession in the whole world which you could step into, what would you choose?
A professional heroin addict, I think.
Why? That is definitely the first time anyone has ever said that on this show. 100%.
No, I grew up in a kids, I'm joking. But
they're like writing it down.
Also joking. I grew up in a family of 2 painters, and I grew up in a creative household, and so I always kind of grew up
as the
with
heroin.
the idea that I wanted to do something creative. I'd also been a musician. If I were to not do any of that, the other part of my career is I do things that are promote social causes, and so I probably would do a little bit more of that.
That's good.
But yeah, I really like to write.
Yeah. So you're doing the stuff you want to do. That's excellent.
Yeah.
What is the best book you've read recently, and why did you love it?
The best book, which everyone's going to hear about in about a month, is called The Woman in the Window.
Oh, I keep hearing about this. This is like you're like the third person to say this to me this week.
Yeah,
why?
So it's has everything. I mean, it's like it's this guy AJ Finn, that's his pen name, and I got to interview him a few months ago, but it just aired a couple weeks ago. And he's a writer in New York, and he has a book about a woman who has agoraphobia, who is sheltered in her Harlem brownstone, and she feels like she sees a crime across the street.
And it
So
has it's echoes of Rear Window, right?
it echoes of Rear Window, and it's very self-aware of its echoing of Rear Window.
Mm-hmm.
The main character has a fondness for noir films and Hitchcock. And so it's very much a love letter to, in the same way that Stranger Things is a love letter to the 80s,
Yeah.
but is its own thing. This is a love letter to Hitchcock and classic noir. And he writes beautifully, and it is just a gripping thriller. And I was able to get a review copy last July, and I just read it, and I was like, yeah, this is going to be the one that this is going to be the new girl on the train.
I'm actually getting a review copy tomorrow from a thriller friend of mine who hadn't just finished it, and she said, when I see you tomorrow, I'm handing this off. So I can't wait.
Since everyone said that, I'll give you a book that may not have come across been on your radar. It's a book called Hex, Hex.
I haven't heard of it.
And it's by I think a Danish writer named Thomas Olde Havold, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And it's about a northern New York town on the Hudson Valley that for 400 years has been plagued by a witch. And the witch isn't a ghost, but it's a real manifestation of a woman who just hasn't died in 400 years.
I'm in.
And to control her, they've sewn her eyes shut because God knows what would happen if they ever opened them. So she will literally all of a sudden just be in your living room and pop out and then just be in the middle of the street. It depends. And so the thing that changes is that he builds this world where the sheriff, everyone tries to keep people from moving into town because once you've moved into town, you can't move out.
No.
But the kids that have had to grow up with this town and realize they can't really leave, they have started to get things like cellular devices. And so with cameras, and so things start to slip out. And what happens when this story can start to leak out of town?
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
That is one of those stories that I mean, I'm sure you have it as a writer. You hear those stories and you're like, God, I wish I had thought of that. I just want to write that.
Right. Yeah.
And speaking of things that you want to write, will you tell us where we can find you and what we should look for from you? I've actually got the Euthanist on my Kindle. I haven't started it yet, but now that I've talked to you and I've learned about the heroin, I can't wait to start. I really can't.
Well, I'd like to dissuade you from starting the heroin.
Good point.
I have a few more books that are in the pipeline. I haven't announced any of them yet because it's all depending on what happens with my agent and my publisher. So I have 2 books out now, and the best way to find me is to go to www.alexdolan.com. So that's ALEXDOLAN.com. And also you can look me up on Amazon or any of the places you normally buy books.
And is your podcast linked on your website? Can they find you from there?
It is, yes.
Great.
And the podcast is called Thrill Seekers.
Yeah.
And it's part of a larger author network called Authors on the Air Global Radio Networks.
I am going to start listening because, like I told you in the email, thriller is a new genre for me, and I'm really trying to nail it. And it's hard jumping to a new genre. It really is difficult. Yeah. So, excellent. Well, I'm so glad to meet you. Thank you for spending your time with us, and it's been such a delight to talk to you. I hope that I see you in our unnamed cafe soon.
I hope so too.
I will buy you a coffee in return for spending your time with us. Thank you so
That'd
much,
be great.
Alex.
All right.
Okay,
all right,
happy writing to you. Bye.
All right, bye.